Just before we saw those pictures, we were talking to Mark Webster at Hyde Park. He's there now. Mark?
Indeed, I have with me from Portsmouth, Debbie, Christopher and Andy, who I know. What did you think of the service, Debbie?
I thought it was very moving. I've never experienced anything like it before in my life, and I'm glad I came up today because I felt it was the way that I could say goodbye to it. It was the only way I could get it out of my system.
Yes, you said you've been grieving all week, you've been crying a lot all week. Do you think it's helped?
Again in a minute. It has helped, yeah. It didn't actually physically hit me until the coffin was removed from the gun carriage, and obviously that's when the realisation sunk in that she really had gone.
Christopher, what did you think?
Well, Elton John's rewrite of Candle in the Wind was very sad, and so was Elle Spencer's speech, and that was what made me cry. And then from then on I just couldn't stop crying, and that was it. And same as my mum, I had to come to get it out of my system.
Andy, it must have been the same for you. Terribly emotional experience.
Well, it was very emotional, and as Christopher said, Candle in the Wind, and Elle Spencer's speech. Elle Spencer summed up the whole of the nation, I think, the whole of the country there with what he said.
Do you think his sentiment in particular, that the two princes should be left alone by the media, is something that everybody feels?
Yes, very much so. And the spontaneous applause that followed that, I think, summed up what everybody thought and what the country feels and how he managed to put it across.
Yes,
just wonderful.
I can turn back here. But, I mean, you were making the point, you thought it was a bit political, but obviously his point really is, let the princes have as normal an upbringing as they possibly can.
Yes, one of my neighbours on Sunday said to me, who is going to take them to Thorpe Park? And I think that's what really moved me. Yes, my children had those opportunities. I hope those boys had the chance to do things that children do.
Yes, for you, who's had a very normal upbringing. Do you feel a lot of sympathy for the princes?
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, being in their place and having to do things that they do, especially just after their mums died.
And what did you think of how they acquitted themselves today?
Well, I think they were very brave out there, because I don't think I could have done that.
I think it's only fair to turn to you, Christopher, and ask you exactly the same question. What did you think of those young lads out there today?
Well, my heart just goes out to them. I feel so sorry for them. They're like, Mum done everything for them. And I don't think Charles will take them to Thorpe Park, but I think William will take Harry to the pictures and everything. But their dad will take them to some places, but not all the time like their mum did.
Well, it's a thought from those people here, I say, have shared this extraordinary experience today. Trevor.
We heard how the service, thank you, Mark Webster, we heard how the service at Westminster this morning was a combination of so many things, of the public and the private, of people from all walks of life. Julia Somerville is talking to some of them now.
Trevor, I have with me Chris de Burgh, who I think needs no further introduction. Chris, you were obviously in there. Tell me your feelings about the service.
Julia, that was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever been at or felt a part of. And the most moving moment for me was when Earl Spencer made his tribute to his sister. And outside the Abbey, we could hear the applause as everybody, the people power, showed itself again. And I heard the applause grow, and it came through the west door, up the aisle, and everybody started applauding within the Abbey, and it made your hair stand on end. It felt like the applause was going all the way up to Diana herself in a coffin. It was an expression of power and emotion, and at that point I lost it myself, but I've never heard people applauding in church like that, or certainly not at a funeral.
Lord Spencer's tribute to his sister was so incredibly heartfelt, and he was all the time reminding people about what a gift Diana herself had in dealing with people. Tell us how you first came to meet her.
I met her about 10 years ago when she got in touch with me about the Enniskillen disaster, and subsequently we've been in touch a lot. I remember various occasions, for example, when she came back from Argentina. The morning she got back, she wrote me a lovely note accepting an album, Beautiful Dreams, that I'd sent her, and she said at the end of the note, I could use some beautiful dreams right now. She was a very charismatic woman. She made you feel special, and she had that gift of making just like stardust on everybody that met her. She knew how to be a star in as much as she left something with you after she'd gone and moved away from you. She was an outstanding lady, and beautiful and vulnerable and everything that, you know, we wanted to hold her.
Elements, of course, that are very strongly in Elton John's song, and the altered version of which we heard today, my impression was that that came over incredibly powerful. Was it the same for you?
Absolutely, Julia. I was sitting a few yards away from him, and I reckon I was one of the few people in the church who, in the cathedral, who actually knew what he was going through. Shortly before I caught eye contact with him, and I gave him the thumbs up, and I said, you know, to myself, good luck, Elton. And the words were gorgeous, and people were extremely moved at the end. I also felt then people wanted to applaud, because we actually heard people outside applauding, but it wasn't until after Earl Spencer's tribute to his sister that the applause really crashed through the cathedral.
It's a lovely idea that the world outside and the world inside were communicating like that.
It was like a wave of love coming through, and everybody inside, I can tell, were as moved as I was.
Well, Christa Berg, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and talk to us today. Back to you, Trevor, now.
Thank you, Julia. Let's go to the cenotaph now and to our political editor, Mike Brunson. Mike, I suppose the pulse of normal life is returning there?
Yes, it is. Trevor, of course, this is the centre of political power, isn't it? But it has been the most extraordinary experience to stand here with the ordinary people today and to take part in that service, because this street, with all the normally connections with politics and so on, became an open-air abbey during that service, a huge open-air abbey all the way around here. And so 2,000 people in the abbey, 2 million people perhaps in this, what I call the open-air abbey. And it was extraordinary the way that it started with immense grief. As the service began, people were openly crying. I saw one young girl crying and then passing a tissue to an elderly security guard, for example. But I can also bear witness to what happened as being described by earlier comments, because people began then, the mood began to change, and it changed at the end of Elton John's song, because it was out here in the street that they applauded for the first time. Polite, reverential applause, if you like, but an acknowledgement of what Elton John's song had done for them, had given them strength. So that was where the applause had begun. But then, as Earl Spencer began to speak, his tribute out here in Whitehall was applauded no less than 4 times. First, when he said, "We want to thank God for Diana brightening our lives," even though he said God only gave you half a life. But then when he moved on to the part where he was starting to criticize the tabloid press, there was applause at that. First of all, when he said, why is it that they wanted to belittle Diana? Is it because they lack something themselves? It's so baffling. People applauded that. There was even bigger applause, though, when the Earl said that he made his promise to Diana when he said, we won't allow the boys to suffer the anguish that he had to suffer. That was when the applause, quite spontaneous here, and I'm fascinated to hear that it was also that applause, spontaneous applause, outside the Abbey, which then welled up through the Abbey, so that everybody was applauding at the same time.
Michael Brunson, thank you for those observations. Joining me in the studio now, we have Robert Lacey, of course, who has been talking to us earlier this morning, and Canon Stephen Oliver. Can you give me your impression of the service first, Canon Oliver?
Yes, this was no thin secular send-off, was it? This was a deeply religious service, and I think it was one that from the very moment that you got those great sentences from the prayer book, I am the resurrection and the life and so on, the bedrock of Christian faith was there. But it also managed to embrace so many other sensibilities. The moment when Elton John finished singing was one of those poignant moments. The reading that the Prime Minister did, I thought, was just wonderful. I mean, the way in which he captured that and gave it such energy and verve, right the way through to the moment that the Dean finally commended Diana to the care and to the love of God. And then somewhere in there was that very carefully crafted tribute by her brother. Carefully crafted because he started by talking to Diana and gradually moved to talking to her sons and then to the wider world. And I thought that that was one of the most moving things, the comprehensive prayers of the Archbishop, and then that moment when the choir came in after that with London Derriere. I mean, it was just perfectly captured everything that the Archbishop was trying to say.
Robert Lacey, I think this is the point that people are going to remember about the service, or one of the points they're going to remember about the service, the way the Earl Spencer made the point about keeping the boys, he said, duty and so on, fine, but they must also be like their mother. They must also have that touch of the ordinary person. It was quite an extraordinary and pointed point he made there.
Oh, it was the high point, and we've been searching all week for words to express what we feel, and I think if there was one set of words that did it, it was that. And I think actually his secular words frankly, rather transcended everything else. He knew her, knows her better than anybody else. He talked about her intuition. He explained her. He told us new things. He coined these phrases like the constituency of the rejected that she represented. And then that comparison of Diana, the goddess of hunting, who herself was in fact hunted all her life. I felt I could understand that island now up in Northamptonshire where she's heading. I mean, the Spencers gave the girl to us and to the press and to the royal family. The blood family, as he called it. The blood family are taking her back.
The point about that blood family, Kenan, as you were saying, is the gap is opening up, though, again. We thought when the Queen appeared and when the princes went out and talked to young people, something of a closing of ranks had been effected. But now, from what the Earl Spencer said, that gap seems to have opened up again a little bit, didn't it?
I think that there were two very interesting things. The moment at which he cracked himself, that you felt that his face was expressing all the agony of the whole nation there, was the moment at which he was handing Diana on into the care and to the love of God. He actually said words very like that. But before that, what he'd done was to put a marker down. He'd actually said that the blood family would take the responsibility that Diana herself had taken for her sons in that particular area of affection and defence and so on.
It seemed aimed at the other family there.
No, I'm sorry to break in, but I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, he made an allusion to hoping the boys would sing, I think it was, or dance. He's clearly immensely proud of what the Spencers have given now, the royal family. I mean, he was talking as a great old English aristocrat, but I wouldn't interpret it as divisive in that sense.
But he was laying the marker down that they would remain with that commitment that Diana had had for her own sons, that would be part of their family responsibility.
As the little boy said, maybe he's the one who's going to take them to Thorpe Park now.
Robert Lacey, Kenan Oliver, thank you very much. Let's go to join my colleague Adrian Britton now on Carriage Road. Adrian?
Yes, Trevor, what you can see behind me are the crowds who are leaving Hyde Park, having just watched that service, virtually in tearful silence, all races, creeds and ages. I saw a couple over on the lawn, arms around each other, just crying, particularly when the Elton John song was sung. And I think what everybody feels here, and that is despite the vast numbers who are here, they didn't feel as though they were attending a large-scale, public, solemn occasion. Because of their intense feelings towards the princess, they all felt they were attending a private funeral. Let me just turn to some of them here. So what did you think of the service?
It was excellent, very good, especially the Elton John song. It was very heartbreaking, and they were really well.
What did you think of the Earl Spencer's tribute?
Very good, well put together in such short time. Very good.
And the lady to your side, anything in particular which you found particularly moving?
Earl Spencer's speech. That was really moving, yes.
In what way?
I think what he said was exactly how Diana was. And I could understand that. And it moved me.
Let me just move to a lady at your back who are holding flowers. Presumably you're on your way to Kensington Palace.
Yes, I am. I'm on my way to Kensington Palace with some flowers and some poems that the girls at school wrote yesterday. They felt quite touched and moved by the occasion, and I've brought them along today to leave them at the palace gates for Prince William and Harry.
And what did you think of the service?
I thought it was excellent. In such a short time, so many moving statements and sentiments came across. I think everyone was feeling the same, and I think what Earl Spencer said and what Elton John sang was superb.
And the lady to your left? Anything in particular which struck you? Anything particularly moving that you found?
Elton John's song. It was Elton John's song.
Elton John's song. Let's just move over here. I mean, more flowers still. I can't imagine that there is a single growing flower left in this country, having seen so many flowers this week. Anything in particular which you found moving?
The speech.
The speech?
Yeah.
You found it quite powerful?
Yeah, and the song also.
Thank you very much. Trevor, that really does sum up the expression of the intense feeling here. With that, I'll hand you back to the studio.
Thank you very much indeed. As we've been saying, the speech, perhaps by Earl Spencer, the speech would transcend a great deal of what was said and heard at that service this morning. Let's just remind ourselves again what the Earl Spencer said.
There is no doubt that she was looking for a new direction in her life at this time. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers. I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media. why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. My own and only explanation is that genuine goodness is threatening to those at the opposite end of the moral spectrum. It is a point to remember that of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this: a girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age. She would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, on your behalf. We will not allow them to suffer the anguish that used regularly to drive you to tearful despair. And beyond that, on behalf of your mother and sisters, I pledge that we, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you are steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. We fully respect the heritage into which they have both been born, and will always respect and encourage them in their royal role. But we, like you, recognize the need for them to experience as many different aspects of life as possible, to arm them spiritually and emotionally for the years ahead. I know you would have expected nothing less from us. William and Harry, we all care desperately for you today. We're all chewed up with sadness at the loss of a woman who wasn't even our mother. How great your suffering is, we cannot even imagine. I would like to end by thanking God for the small mercies he's shown us at this dreadful time, for taking Diana at her most beautiful and radiant, and when she had joy in her private life. Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister, the unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
And after that speech by Earl Spencer, there was actually applause in Westminster Abbey, and I suppose around the country, as there was also in Hyde Park. We saw it on those monitors. And I think there's some pictures now, helicopter pictures, of the cortege making its way up the M1. Still some way to go to Northampton, but now picking up pace, or having picked up pace. Just a lone hearse on its way to Diana's final resting place. And still you can see the crowds are thinned out a little now, but still people on the motorway. Not something which is usually allowed by the police, but still people on the motorway paying their final respects, and on those bridges overlooking parts of the motorway. All the cars on the other side of the road have stopped. Some perhaps have been stopped by police, but others are doing it just out of respect. People are running across the bridges to get a better view. Let's now, from those pictures, go to Dermot Monaghan at our Buckingham Palace studio, perhaps picking up on that point about Earl Spencer's speech. First of all, the press and the other comments he made. Dermot?
Yes, indeed, Trevor. I'm joined by Penny Junor, the royal biographer, and Ash Wyndham, a former equerry to the Queen. Penny Junor, Earl Spencer clearly did strike a chord with the people, as Trevor said there. There was applause in Westminster Abbey. We heard the applause ourselves outside Buckingham Palace.
Yes, I must say I was disappointed by his speech, by his address. The service had been so moving and so filled with love and warmth and shared grief, and suddenly, I mean, he was so angry, and I understand his anger, but it just, for me, it injected a very sour note in what had been a very beautiful service.
Ash Wyndham, how do you feel that the royal family will have reacted to the Earl's speech?
I think they would have understood the sentiment behind it. I think the service itself was a wonderfully crafted bit of work, and combining the ancient and the modern. I think it did great justice to Diana, Princess of Wales.
The whole day, the whole occasion really reflected that, didn't it? The formal mixing, very easy with the informal. Did it really show that royal protocol can evolve and adapt and meet the people's needs and requirements?
Absolutely. We've only got to look behind us now, and you'll see the Union Jack is still flying at half-mast from the standard at Buckingham Palace, and the Royal Standard has not yet been put up. I'm sure that that is a good indication of how the Queen and the remainder of the royal family feel about this.
Penny Junor, just reflecting further on the Earl's address there, that's accommodation almost that he sketched out between the royal family and the Spencer family about bringing up the young Princes William and Harry. Do you think that can actually work?
Well, I mean, I think the Prince of Wales will do a very good job in bringing up his sons. And I think that was another sort of unnecessarily sour note, I thought, to suggest that it would be her family who would perhaps take over and do the things with them which Diana had wanted for them, which seemed to be as though they were incompatible with the sort of things that the royal family would do with them. I mean, if this is how he's feeling, I just don't think now was the moment to say it.
Well, Ash Wyndham, one thing was glaringly obvious about the whole day was the way those young princes conducted themselves behind their mother's coffin. Extraordinary decorum and bearing there.
Yeah, it's very brave. Young Prince Harry is slightly out of step with the rest, not quite matching his father's footsteps.
Almost eager to get it over and done with, perhaps.
Yes, a pace or two ahead on many occasions. It must have been a very grueling ordeal, and one which they're still going through.
And, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that being slightly out of step and walking a bit too quickly reminded me very much of the Princess of Wales's first tour of Wales after the marriage, which was her first walkabout, really, as Princess of Wales. And she was very like that, walking slightly too fast and getting out of step and being all legs and you know, eager. And clearly he was, I mean, you know, totally different circumstances. But it was...
Still a memory to treasure.
A memory to treasure.
Penny Junor, Ash Wyndham, thank you both very much.
Dermot Monaghan at our Buckingham Palace studio. The focus of the service was, of course, at Westminster Abbey, but there were people in Hyde Park watching the service, following every moment of it on those huge screens, and they made an incredible picture. Let's go now to Joe Andrews, who is at Hyde Park Corner.
Most of the people here are now leaving silently and quite quietly. A number of people who spent all night here, in fact, have been catching up with some sleep on the lawns in the sunshine. But 3 people who listened to all of that service are with me now, 3 young people who came this morning from Croydon. Becca, what did you think of the service?
I thought it was brilliant. I especially liked Elle Spencer's speech and Elton John's song with the new verse.
When you grow up, what will you tell your own children about today? What's the thing you're going to remember most of all?
Just how everyone was in touch with each other and like helping each other, like the younger children get into the front and that. I just thought it was wicked.
And next to Becca is Louis. Louis, where did you come from this morning?
I've come all the way from Croydon.
And what did you think of the service?
I thought that the service was superb and that everyone loves Diane very much, and my favourite bit was the national anthem.
Why?
It was so touching to my heart.
What's the bit that you're going to remember most?
The national anthem.
And next to Louis is Marsha. Marsha, what about you? What did you think of it?
It was really nice, and everyone was like paying their respect coming down here and that. My best part was Elton John's song. Everyone stood up and paid their respect and clapped and that.
Do you feel that it's helped you, this service?
Yeah. She'll always be remembered.
How would you like to remember her best?
Just... don't know, just as a loving person, friendly, and everyone loved her.
Thank you. Trevor, back to you.
Joe Andrews with some young people talking about this morning's memorable service. And one of the most memorable aspects of it, the one that people talk about for a long time, was that revised version of the old Elton John classic, Candle in the Wind. Let's remind ourselves what it sounded like.
Goodbye, England's rose. May you ever grow in our hearts. You are the grace that placed yourselves where lives were torn apart. apart. You called out to our country and you whispered to those in pain, now you belong to heaven, and the stars spell out your name. And it seems to me you lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Loneliness we've lost, those empty days without your smile, this torch we'll always carry for our nation's golden child. Even though we try, the truth brings us to tears. All our words cannot express the joy you brought us through the years. And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Goodbye, England's rose. May you ever grow in our hearts. You were the grace that placed yourselves where lives were torn apart. Goodbye, English road, from the country lost without your soul, who missed the wings of your compassion more than you will ever know. And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will.
Elton John, he was singing there Goodbye English Rose, although we thought the word should be Goodbye England's Rose. More pictures now from the cortege making its way up the motorway. Seems to have slowed down a bit now. 3 police cars in attendance behind. As you heard, the royal princes are in fact, the young princes are in fact making their way there to the Spencer estate by the royal train. The hearse is going up on the motorway virtually on its own. Outriders and police protection officers. And again, the crowds surge forward. I think it was known that on the streets of North London there'll be hundreds of thousands of people. But I wonder whether anybody anticipated how many there might be on the motorway. And the applause that we heard earlier in London this morning, again. The crowd seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see. We're just about to lose sight of it now, fading away into the distance on its way up to the Spencer estate. Back here in the studio, Ken and Stephen Oliver, Dean of St. Paul's, and Robert Lacey. Ken and Oliver, first of all, we talked a lot about the service. Can I just take you back to some moments before the service actually begun? Those shots of the Queen with her head bowed as the coffin passed Buckingham Palace. All the members of the royal family, or so many members of the royal family, standing there.
Quite unprecedented. I mean, we'd never seen pictures like that before, and I think that the comment was made that around the world people will be looking at those pictures and thinking that that was fairly normal, but for us it wasn't. It was an astonishing picture of royal humility.
And give us a sense, in your words, of what you thought the significance of that was.
I think that that was royal humility. I think that that was the royal family bowing before the truth of what Diana had meant to the people of this country and making some symbolic gesture that was very powerful. Once we'd gone on just beyond that and the royal princes and Prince Charles and Prince Philip joined that cortege going towards the Abbey, there wasn't a dry eye in the house here, I have to say, that there were people weeping openly. And I think that that speaks volumes as to the power of that particular moment leading up to the service.
Yes, they were all gathered there. And then, of course, Robert Lacey, as the canon said, the poignancy of the princes and the Duke of Edinburgh walking along with them. And occasionally you could see the old Spencer, or the father, Prince Charles, occasionally comforting one of the boys. What must have been an extraordinary ordeal for them.
Yes, it was a very important symbolic act, because it's well known that in the conflicts within the family, the Duke of Edinburgh has been particularly on the other side when it came to some of the arguments. I like the naturalness of it, the fact that the royal family just came out of their house, as it were. It was an echo of yesterday, when the Queen turned up at Buckingham Palace gates and sort of stopped and said, goodness, what's been going on here? Sort of an acknowledgement of having been out of touch, but moved and wanting to participate in getting straight out.
This, in fact, was where there was that intersection between what one would consider sort of royal protocol and the kind of life that Diana actually lived and what she came to represent.
Yes, exactly. And if people take offence at what Lord Spencer said, it's because I think that's the sort of speech that Diana herself would have given. The sort of speech that might have offended some people, but which really captured her essence.
Canon, we talked about it before, but are you happy with Elton John singing in one of your great churches?
I'm more than happy. I have said so all week. The amazing thing about Elton John is that you read words like that, and on the page they don't seem to be particularly profound or moving. But put it with his music, and in a context like a great abbey or a cathedral with its resonances and those great crowds of people, and all of a sudden it is very powerful. And it's powerful in a religious sense, I think. It reaches to the very depths of what human beings are feeling. And I think it worked brilliantly, particularly where it came at that particular moment.
I thought the Archbishop was particularly interesting because he took the care and trouble to mention the other person who died, or one of the other people who died in this crash, Dodi Al-Fayed.
Yes, he mentioned both, actually. He mentioned Dodi and the driver. And I think that was a very sensitive thing to do. And there was a point later on in the prayers where he acknowledged all sorts of things that were going on. He wasn't on script, as it were, at that point. He was praying from the heart, and I think that that came through. You could see by the way in which people were bowing their heads in the park and outside the Abbey, the way that they were singing. I suspect they were singing the hymns better outside the Abbey than they were in, to be honest. But you could see in which the way in which everybody was together in that service, and it was a very real and deep religious moment for them.
Canon, for the moment, thank you very much. Robert Lacey, for the moment, thank you. As the funeral car makes its way north, Tim Hewitt is in Northamptonshire at the village of Duston, near Althorpe Park. Tim?
Yes, Trevor, we've been here since early this morning watching the crowds gather. It was very quiet at the beginning of the day here. Most people stayed indoors to watch the funeral on television. But as you can see now, behind me, a very large crowd indeed is building up. And this crowd all the way down the road to Althorpe Park, where princess, very privately, is going to be buried. Carrying the princess's body will pass down this road, we think in about 1 hour's time. Now, I'm joined here in the crowd by somebody who remembers Princess Diana very well, Betty Andrew, housekeeper and a cook at Althorpe Park for many years. Betty, this must have been a difficult afternoon for you.
Well, it has been very emotional. I watched the service this morning and the tears didn't come until the minute's silence, and then they did come.
What are your memories of Diana?
Well, I knew her from when she was 14, and she was a very quiet, typical teenager. She was a really lovely girl. I mean, she looked after her brother when he came home from school. She did the ordinary things that a teenager did. I mean, she loved dancing, swimming. She used to come into the kitchen and help me cook when I was cook there.
And to eat as well, I think.
Oh, yes, definitely. They all used to come in. They used to drop the luggage in the front hall, just raid the larder.
Events have taken, obviously, an extraordinary turn since those days. I know that you listened to the speech this afternoon of Earl Spencer. What were your reactions to that? Because he had some very strong things to say, didn't he?
Yes, but I think I believed everything he said, because I think that was what he thought, and I think that's what I thought as well. It was a really lovely speech.
Good. Betty, thank you very much. So we're expecting, Trevor, once again, the hearse carrying the princess to pass by here very soon. This road will be closed. Mourners will line this route for the couple of miles to Althorpe. We expect that to happen in about 1 hour's time.
Tim Hewitt in Northamptonshire. Let's look now at an excerpt from this morning's extraordinary procession. Pictures there from the procession this morning featuring two things. One, the princes walking behind their mother's coffin, and then the charities behind. There were so many people from the charities who marched behind the coffin down to Westminster Abbey. Dermot Monaghan can now tell us a little bit about how the service was organised with the help of his two guests. Dermot?
Yes, indeed, Trevor. I'm joined by Colonel Andrew Parsons, an expert in ceremony, and former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Jim Sewell, who helped police the royal wedding back in 1981. Colonel Parsons, just looking at those scenes there of the young boys lining up behind the coffin of their mother with the Duke of Edinburgh, with Earl Spencer and with Prince Charles. And then the people involved in all the charities milling in behind. There it was. There was the mixture between the ceremonial and the informal.
Wasn't it done beautifully? And the planning beforehand was obviously of key importance. And then Colonel Alexander Madison, Brigade Major at Headquarters Household Division, was the Chief Marshal, and he had 6 assistants, I think, who steered that informal part of the procession in behind the royal princes to go on down the Mall, and just made sure that that flowed smoothly and kept up to time and so on. And I thought it was done with real tact and skill, very quietly and very effectively, so that the full impact of that quite unique procession came across very well indeed.
Just reflecting for a moment on the very formal part of that ceremony, didn't those young soldiers from the 1st Battalion of the Welsh Guards do very well in that heat, in those uniforms, over that distance?
I thought they were quite outstanding. We have a professional army that we're rightly very proud of, but they produced a near perfect performance throughout, and you're quite right. They had a long march in really very warm weather, and then the most taxing part of the day, taking the coffin up through the Abbey, came with absolutely no respite at all for them. And we saw just from what the weight of the coffin was like, what effort they had to put into it. I think one must also pay tribute to the King's Troop as well. I just noticed at the very beginning of the procession that 1 or 2 of the horses were fidgety, not fractious, but fidgety, and their outstanding horsemanship soon got them to relax, and by the time they came to Buckingham Palace and from then on, they were perfect, as near to perfect as you can be.
Deputy Assistant Commissioner Jim Sewell, you, of course, helped police the royal wedding in 1981. Very different circumstances, of course, today, but are the numbers similar?
I think there was probably more than at the royal wedding. I understand from colleagues they're saying about 1.5 million people. That may be extended if you think the people we've seen on the television en route to the M1 in Althorpe. So the number could extend from that.
But the police must have had one of the easiest jobs in the world. The rapport with the crowd there. I saw one policeman picking up flowers from someone in the crowd to throw them in front of the hearse. Someone had clearly asked him to do that.
Yes, I had the opportunity to speak with some of the officers, and I agree with what they said, that I have never known such an occasion when there has been so much quiet and reverence, and really the police's job was done for them by the impeccable behavior of the crowd, which was expected, of course. But what I also thought was really wonderful was the obvious rapport between the police and the public, and you have amply illustrated one of the things that we saw. We also saw as well, when Elton John was singing, some of the officers were greatly affected and actually sobbing and shedding a tear over that as well.
Jim Sewell, Colonel Parsons, thank you very much indeed. Now back to you, Trevor.
Dermot, an indication of some of the planning that went into Diana's funeral. It's been said again and again that the funeral was the people's funeral, not official and certainly not state. ITN's John Draper has been talking to just a few of the millions who, in their own way, took part today.
First light at Westminster Abbey, and for the thousands who spent the night there, the long wait was coming to an end. Many had endured considerable discomfort to be there to say their final goodbyes to the princess. But they were glad to be part of a shared experience of people coming together to demonstrate their deep feelings for Diana, Princess of Wales.
I just couldn't miss it. I just thought the world of her, and it's a great loss. She's a great loss to us, and there'll never be a replacement.
Why is it special to be sharing the day with all these other people?
Well, she was special. Right?
I just wanted to come pay my respects to Diana. She was such a beautiful woman. She cared about lots of other people, including her own children.
But it was only when the cortege made its way through central London, here at Buckingham Palace, taking the people's princess on her final journey, that the princess's people began fully to take in their loss.
I didn't realise that I'd feel as bad as I actually did when it went past. Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't help but cry when she came back. Yeah. I mean, it was so simple. The casket, the flowers on the casket, very appropriate for her.
This was a royal funeral, but the people's wishes were respected. The Union flag flew for the first time ever at Buckingham Palace. As it was lowered to half-mast, the people showed their appreciation. Tens of thousands watched the funeral and the service on massive screens in Hyde Park. Elton John reflected their feelings.
And it seems to me you lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain
At the Abbey, the service was also relayed, the Earl Spencer's tribute striking a chord with those outside.
We want you to know that life without you is very, very difficult.
As inside the Abbey, they broke into spontaneous applause. At Harrods, a few miles away, the minute's silence which ended the service had particular poignancy. As the mourners left Westminster Abbey, one of the Princess's advisors summed up the thoughts of many.
If only things had been different, what a queen we would have had.
She didn't become queen, but she'll always be the people's princess. John Draper, ITN.
One of the charities for which the Princess worked so tirelessly was the British Red Cross. One of the officials of that charity is talking now to Julia Somerville. Julia?
Yes, indeed. I have with me Dr. Frank Riding of the British Red Cross. Dr. Riding, you were here as a representative of the charities who played such an important part in today's service. Did the service as a whole live up to your expectations?
Oh, yes, I think so. I mean, I'm a fairly hard-bitten individual and nothing gets through to me, but this did. It was really very emotional. I think the thing that surprised me, actually, was the fact that we were all there together. I mean, I was literally a few seats away from the royal family. Tony Blair was facing me, and I always thought we'd be probably put somewhere at the back, but we weren't. We were members of almost one big family, really, and that surprised me and delighted me. I think that was very appropriate.
It was appropriate, and it was, I'm sure, in keeping with what are perceived as the Princess's wishes, that her charity work in particular should be one of the things that she's remembered for. Now, you were very connected to her campaign against landmines. Did you find that she was as involved and as well informed as other people have found with their charity work?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I've worked with Red Cross surgical hospitals for a long time, and I think that what she achieved in a very short time of her support for landmine victims did far more than I could ever have hoped to achieve in 18 years of work, and for that I'm very humbled and in fact very grateful. And I think that even after her death today, I think her influence is actually living on. That's not dead at all. That's going to continue. And I think I'll always be grateful for that.
Do you feel, after having been through the service today, a sense of catharsis? Or do you think the general feeling that's left, particularly after Lord Spencer's speech, is one of a rather troubled atmosphere?
I thought it was very impressive, and I think everyone else felt that. The ripple of applause, which I gathered started outside the cathedral, we could hear it coming through the nave slowly, and all the people in the actual abbey itself taking part of the service took up this applause, and it's sort of the atmosphere from outside was actually shared inside, which I thought was very strange, but again, very moving.
I think the silence was also one of the qualities, particularly at the beginning and the end of the service, and certainly outside here. Although there were thousands and thousands of people, everybody was absolutely rapt with attention, listening to what we could hear on the speakers. Inside the church, it must have been even more impressive.
Oh, it was. It was absolutely. The atmosphere was very quiet and very dignified, which I think was something that was deserved by it. And at the same time, this achievement of mixing the modern and the traditional, which I think was one of the aims of the people who organised it, I think that came off incredibly well. I certainly felt it, and certainly the Red Cross people I was with felt that as well.
And of course, it was a perfect summary of a princess such as Diana, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was, and very eerie things took place, like when the two sisters were doing the readings, and I felt a lot of people felt this as well. They looked in a way a bit like Diana, and their voices sounded a little bit Diana. That was very strange and a little bit disturbing in a way, and yet moving, but you could almost feel that it was Princess Diana herself who was actually saying these words. And that was another effect which I felt very moving. The whole thing, I thought, was done very well, and it was just what was needed at this time.
Dr. Frank Riding, thank you very much indeed for that. Back to you now, Trevor.
Thanks, Julia. You're watching a specially extended coverage of the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales. As you know, we're waiting for the hearse carrying the princess's body to arrive at Althorpe Park for the private family burial. We think that that should happen about 3 o'clock or at about 3:15. And then later this afternoon, we'll rebroadcast this morning's procession and the service at Westminster Abbey. We'll show you that at around 3:30 for anyone who's just coming in. In the meantime, my guest, Hugo Vickers, rejoins us. Robert Lacey's here. Hugo Vickers, was there any discussion at all about that very moving, silent journey of the coffin from Kensington Palace down to the Abbey? People threw flowers, but at the beginning, there was a marvellous, solemn silence about it.
Yes, I think that's one of the many spontaneous things that's happened in the course of the last week. And I think that they were obviously very anxious that it shouldn't be in any sense of really a military procession with the normal bands and sort of drums and things like that. So I think that already, in a way, inspired a certain silence. I mean, again, of course, we did notice a little sort of bit of, in a sense, some wailing almost at the beginning, and I thought that might take over. But I think in a way, this kind of very silent this solemn clapping, which is evidently a French thing, was also rather moving. I think that worked very well.
You said that, of course, I mean, it was silent and it was solemn, and that was probably very much Diana, Princess of Wales. But then the contrast came with the fact that the cortege went through these rather pompous arcades and redolent of history and power and privilege and sort of institutionalized.
That's right. He went past the Albert Memorial and the Wellington's Memorial and his house. And she was going into history, wasn't she? And we're all part of history. And her own particular characteristics will be lent to that. The thing I particularly liked was the way in which the coffin, as it went through the doors of the Abbey, the clock struck 11. And I'd wondered, why are we starting at 8 minutes past 9?
Precision.
Marvellous British precision, which is just what the Queen had asked for the night before.
She would have been very pleased about the number of people from the variety of various interests who turned up there. It was a panorama of her life in one respect.
It certainly was, and you know, all through this week we've been amazed, I think, by the amount of flowers, but were we not also astonished when we first saw Hyde Park? We've talked about a carpet of flowers. I mean, the whole of Hyde Park was covered. I mean, that was just completely astounding. Everybody wanted to be there together to watch those screens, those that couldn't see the procession, and to take part of it. It's got a tremendous spirit of unity, really.
Because,
well, just one other thing. I just wanted to say the memory of those boys walking with their father. I thought that was a few good points for the stiff upper lip and British stoicism that's been rather rubbished, perhaps, in the past week. But I think it's what actually everybody expected, and everybody feels the better for having seen.
Robert Lacey, Hugh Vickers, for the moment, thank you very much. We've been talking about individual moments about what we saw this morning, but for a brief roundup of the highlights of the morning, here's Hugh Pym.
All night they'd waited, and as the coffin at last left Kensington Palace, the grief of some in the crowd was plain. The coffin borne on the gun carriage of the Royal Horse Artillery, the bearer party from the Welsh Guards. Thousands packing every inch of this extended route. But apart from the sound of the horses' hooves, the procession was watched in almost total silence. At Westminster Abbey, those invited to the funeral were arriving from the world of entertainment: Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. From the world of politics, Lady Thatcher among former prime ministers, and Hillary Clinton. And then Mohammed Al Fayed, grieving both for Diana and his eldest son. As the cortege neared Buckingham Palace, the Queen, Princess Margaret and other members of the royal family waited and watched. And then the most poignant of moments, the two young princes would be joining the procession for its final stage. Prince William and Prince Harry, their father alongside, with Earl Spencer and the Duke of Edinburgh. More than 500 representatives of Diana's charities processing slowly behind them. And as they moved through from Horse Guards Parade to Whitehall, there was a touch of reassurance for Prince Harry from his uncle. And at last they reached the Abbey, exactly as planned, a few minutes before 11, for this essentially private service, which was to be at the same time a uniquely public occasion. No fanfares, no trumpets and drums, but a mix of traditional and popular, chosen to reflect the character and spirit of Diana.
Goodbye, English rose. May you ever grow in our hearts. You were the grace that placed yourselves where lives were torn apart. Goodbye, English rose, from a country lost without your soul, who missed the wings of your compassion more than you will ever know.
And so to the tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, by the Earl Spencer, with strong words for the media, who he said had hounded his sister.
Of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age.
And the young princes, Prince Charles and members of the Spencer family arriving there, they arrived by royal train at Long Buckby. And from there, from the cars which are positioned there, we imagine that they will have a short drive to the Spencer family estate at Northamptonshire. Just got those pictures in. Long Buckby is the station. Live these pictures are. The princes and the Spencers, Prince Charles included, just arrived, a fleet of cars there to take them all to the Spencer estate, where everything will be private. It's a very short journey from London. Of course, while they're there, the hearse is still making its way, so there'll be some time before the hearse arrives at the Spencer estate. But no doubt the princes, Prince Charles, members of the Spencer family will be getting into those cars very shortly and moving off and heading up for the estate. Not very short, not very long a journey from there. So Robert Lacey, the princes reuniting with the cortege now in Northamptonshire. Yes. This is going to be the final private aspect of today's very public event.
Yes, yes, going home, reclaimed, once again returning to Lord Spencer's speech. Everybody seems to be dwelling on the contentious things he said, but it was really very, I thought, a human speech, talking about...
He'd be very satisfied with his performance today.
Yes, and I felt satisfied listening to it. I felt finally everything had been said. The anger had been expressed, but the family feelings had been expressed as well. The human emotions had been worked through.
Hugo Vickers, your views?
Yes, I mean, there's absolutely no question about it that Lord Spencer was speaking the truth.
There are people, as you can see, people applauding again. It seems to become rather the custom from this morning. My colleague John Suchet said earlier that it's a French custom, but there they were doing it too in Northamptonshire.
Yes, they've picked that up, and it is must be very emotional for the people of Northamptonshire as they reclaim their princess.
Are the Spencers very close to the people there?
Well, they've been there for a very long time, and they have taken a big part in Northamptonshire life, and particularly, obviously,
we're off those pictures now, and we interrupted the speech by the Earl Spencer, to bring you those pictures, which we're just getting in. Let's return now to what he actually said this morning.
Of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age. She would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, on your behalf. Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister. The unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
In another extraordinary break with tradition, applause slowly swelled around Westminster Abbey. Finally, the minute's silence. The hearse then left the Abbey to begin its journey to Northamptonshire. Applause among the thousands lining the Mall. Many throwing flowers as their final tribute to Diana. Cue Pym, ITN.
We've just heard that the police estimate there were 1 million people in London this morning following the proceedings at Westminster Abbey. 1 million people coming out in tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales. Joe Andrews is in Hyde Park. Joe, give us a sense of what was going on there this morning as the service was being conducted at Westminster.
There were literally thousands of people here. Most of them were listening in silence, and I guess that here too the applause started for Earl Spencer's speech long before it became heard inside Westminster Abbey. But the numbers of people I've spoken to here who say yes, the Earl Spencer's speech will remain with them. But I think what will also remain with people here is the silent sight of that coffin coming up Carriage Drive. Most people here were able to see it for 10 to 15 minutes in complete silence. All I heard then were people beginning to cry, and it was a truly extraordinary thing.
You were right close up to the route. It must have been very moving.
It was very moving. People were very tired by that stage. A lot of them had been here all night. I was here until about midnight last night. Spoke to some of the people. They did have some rain during the night, but they were completely determined that they would stay here until they saw the coffin. One of them said to me that he wouldn't believe that she was dead until he had seen with his own eyes the cortege come past him.
Mike Brunson talked earlier, he was talking from the Cenotaph, about the friendliness which seemed to have evolved over these many hours and days among the people. Did you see evidence of that there?
Certainly, yes. Children were pushed to the front very gently. I was at St James's earlier this week and I was completely struck by that. Marlborough Road became impassable at times, and yet no one complained, no one tried to push through other people. They made way for the younger, they made way for the older. Nobody said anything grumpy to each other. They were just extraordinarily gentle, and there was a great dignity in that, as there was here today.
And of course, the other thing we mentioned, and we've kept mentioning throughout the days now, ever since the tragedy of Diana's death, no need for any kind of crowd control. All these people who were signing books of condolences, all these people queuing for hours outside the royal palaces to place their floral tributes, no need for control. The policemen were there, the policewomen were there, but just standing back, helping the crowd to express what they wanted to.
Yes, the policeman who was standing beside us said that he had been at Winston Churchill's funeral, and he had been down, I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning. He said he'd gone down to the Thames and he'd nearly frozen to death. And he stood beside us and talked about it. And a lot of the children who were here, for whom this was the most important day of their lives, were able to listen to him talking about what for him up until today had been a very big day.
Joe, the other thing we picked up was that they themselves, the policemen, were very strangely moved. Not that they're incapable of expressing these human emotions, but we don't always see them in that light.
No,
we see them doing a very tough job. But I looked at some of the pictures this morning, and they themselves were very moved, weren't they?
There was a very large bearded inspector who was standing in the middle of the road, and at one stage he got out his handkerchief, wiped both of his eyes, took his hat off and blew his nose and then put it back on again. And it was just the same for the police. They were standing round the cameras afterwards saying that that was quite extraordinary, that they had never seen anything like it, and that they were moved just like ordinary people.
And is anything of normal life returning now to Hyde Park there?
Yes, as you can see behind me, the flowers are still being laid down. People are still